Welcome to Back Porch Tales and Travels, where we have a special segment.
Well, happy to be here today. And a couple weeks ago, I wrote an article about snake handling churches in Central Appalachia. And pleasantly, one morning, I opened up my email and I had an email from our guest today, Max Messer Jr. And he's from my hometown. We grew up in the same hometown, Big Stone Gap, Virginia. And I'm going to kind of turn this over to Max and let you tell your story, quick little bio, how you ended up in Rhode Island. And then you have a wonderful family story with your maternal grandfather. And I'll kind of let you go, though. But Max, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I grew up in Big Stone Gap. I grew up in the cadet section of Big Stone Gap. And my father was a coal miner. My grandfather on my mother's side was a coal miner and a part-time Pentecostal minister. Out of high school, I went into the Air Force, stationed on the Canadian border for 6 years, stayed in New England. And so most of my story, of course, is related through my family, my grandmother, my grandfather's wife, my mother, and my aunts and uncles, because my grandfather unfortunately passed away when he was fairly young, and it was partially because of a snake bite that he received in a church service where he and others were handling snakes. Shortly after the snake bite, he contracted pneumonia. I guess his immune system was already shot at that point, and he got bit by a rattlesnake. The story my mother tells me is that because she used to go with him, her and her sisters, they were handling snakes. Someone, unfortunately, put the snake down on the floor, and it's headed back towards the congregation, towards people who were not participating in the snake handling. And he grabbed it, and it bit him, and at least once. And that, like I said, partially led to his death. So my grandfather, he spent some time in jail for handling snakes on a couple occasions, my mother tells me. And also, I mean, he not only handled snakes, but he also drank strychnine, which is poison. I heard lots of stories. My mother also told me about a church service where my grandmother was there participating. She didn't handle the snakes, but at some point, someone in the service got some hot coals and fire out of the coal stove that was in the church and held it under her hair, and it did not catch on fire. Now, I should preface this with this, and that is that I was told a lot of stories growing up, like most people. But, at some point in my life, I started reflecting on those stories and questioning some of the validity. I'm not judging those people. I'm just saying that I just find at this point in my life, some of the stories that I was told, and probably this may happen to a lot of people as they get older, I questioned whether or not those stories could be true. My mother tells me she was with my grandfather once, and they had gone to church in Kentucky. And I guess they were near Black Mountain, at least according to my mother. And the roads back then, at least, were very windy roads. They were switchbacks. I mean, when I grew up, at least that's what they were. And she said that at one point, while they were heading home, and like I said, these stories are strange, and I don't expect people to believe them or not. But she said that my grandfather released the steering wheel of the car, and that for quite a distance, the car actually drove itself. And that's, I mean, like I said, I was told a lot of strange stories. But yeah, my grandfather he handled snakes primarily with a preacher who was the pastor of what we called the Bottom Church, which was in a section of Big Stone Gap called Italy Bottom. At least that's what it was called when I was growing up. And that was a well-known snake handling church. And he used to go with his pastor, and they would go into Kentucky. They would go into a lot around East Tennessee, especially around the Sneedville, Tennessee area, and to other churches in Virginia. One of the hallmarks of his Christian experience was the actual handling of poisonous snakes. He used to keep them down in, my mother said, in their basement in crates. And come church time, he would go down and grab a crate or two, and they would head off to service.
How old was he when he was bitten? When he
Well,
picked up
I think he was probably only around 61 or 62 years old.
Okay.
Oh, okay. The personal story I wrote about was when I was 17 years old. And I had been to a lot of Pentecostal churches over, throughout my life and stuff. But that was the only time I'd actually went to a snake handling church. And of course, you were talking about the crates. They brought it out in a travel trunk, and they had the big brass. Here I was so young, didn't know what was going on. I thought they were going to break out to hymnals so we could start singing and stuff. But anyway, and I'll tell people, not all Pentecostals do any of this. And then it's a little bit more frequent that you'll have Pentecostal churches, especially in Central Appalachia, talk in tongues. But it's rare still. I don't want the viewers to think that all Pentecostal churches that handle snakes. It's still very rare as far as Pentecostal church. But now, did your grandfather, was there any stories how he got introduced to that church or
Yeah,
that
I asked my
tradition?
mother. I asked my mother the other day. Now she's elderly, of course, now how she thinks he ended up in handling snakes, and she said
Yeah.
he thinks the guy he handled snakes with. It was his last name was Pelfrey, Oscar Pelfrey. He was a coal miner as well as my grandfather, and he thinks they met in the coal mines, and that basically Pelfrey invited him to his church, maybe to preach, and
Mhm.
I'm not sure and that's how he ended up handling snakes. Now, Pelfrey, a little later, after my grandfather died, he got bit by he got bit. He was handling 2 rattlesnakes. I read this article online, um, an old article. He was handling 2 rattlesnakes during service. One bit him on the temple. He refused medical help, and he died 6 hours later. Now, which is really strange to me, though, is that his son used to drive our school bus when I was growing up in high school, and his name was Billy Pelfrey. And at some point, Billy Pelfrey actually moved to South Carolina, and he started handling snakes. And this is after his father had gotten bit by a rattlesnake and died during a church service, which, I find incredible, but I'm not going to question someone's faith, but
Oh, no.
I could not have done that. If I had, I'm probably maybe I'm assuming too much, but my guess is that since it was at his father's church when this happened, my guess is that Billy Pelfrey was there at that service and actually saw what happened. So, but yeah, he moved to South Carolina and started handling snakes himself.
Wonderful stories, Max. Melanie, any questions for us? You got
Yeah, no, I love it. This is kind of like sitting in some rocking chairs on the back porch, just hearing the tales. And it's fascinating to me that you are able to talk about these family experiences with the snake handling, because it seems like such almost a legend, but obviously it really happened. And
Max, we appreciate so much for you coming on the show today.
Nice meeting you both. Have a good day.